Welcome back. You're listening to another episode of the What is Humans podcast with Shane Strunk and Dennis Kluba. Make sure to follow us on our social media channels at What is Humans podcast on Instagram, at What is Humans podcast on TikTok, and on YouTube at What is Humans podcast. Today, Shane and I are discussing ideas versus action. Enjoy.
Hey, welcome. You're on the What is Humans podcast. If you're new to the show, this podcast is on conversations in personal development where myself, Shane Strunk, and my co-host, Dennis Kluba, discuss everyday conversations about everyday life. So, and most importantly, we are experts in...
Almost nothing.
What's up, man?
Nothing much, We're back in the chairs. We're kind of getting back in our groove. Summertime, like we said, it's busy. 4th of July is coming up, but hopefully we can get on a steady streak of...
Yeah, totally. We're also racing at the end of this month, so we're gearing up for that. Mm-hmm. So lots of moving pieces and interesting conversations ahead.
Yeah, completely. It's an exciting time, and that's why... Really, based on a lot of the things that have been going on in our lives, today we're talking about ideas versus action.
Yeah. So you brought me this idea about ideas versus action. Mm-hmm. The first thing I kind of thought of when Dennis brought this to, living with him, being his friend for a while now, he just is so always coming up with crazy ideas. I'm that way in some regard, but it's he runs every single thing by me. And in his job, he was in creative, and then just very quick with the joke. So you gave me some context around how ideas just remain ideas until they're written down.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to be talking about how we can kind of turn these ideas into action. Mm-hmm. And what really separates an idea from something that we can turn into action.
Yeah, completely. Thanks for saying that. I appreciate that. I think that especially on this topic, it's so ironic almost because we are doing a podcast, right? Yeah. Which is a lot of conversation and a lot of ideas and thoughts. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the time, it's either we are, reflecting on actions that we have or have not taken.
Sure.
That could be things that we learned or maybe regrets of not having done something.
Sure.
Or it could be things that we want to do in the future, right? Or things that we're gearing up for.
Yeah.
The difference is how, like you just said, how do we change these big, grand ideas into actual steps and get them done? The one thing that this guy had talked about that I think you'll find interesting is there's a surplus of ideas, and there is a shortage of action that people ever actually act upon.
In all idea, are you saying we should act on every idea, or is it, just the good ideas?
I mean,
I guess I'm trying to differentiate thoughts between, true ideas. What is an idea in this context that we should take action on?
Yeah. I think that in some regard, we should take action on every idea.
Okay.
The way that I mean that is, for example, you just mentioned before we kind of started and got into this topic, I run a ton of ideas by you.
Sure.
I would say 80% of them, maybe not 80, that's a high number, but 65% you're like, hey, that's dumb.
Yeah.
Don't say that, don't do that, don't ever tell anybody else about that, right?
Yeah.
But then there's 20 to 30% that we both look at each other and we say,
interesting.
that's actually something that might be cool to follow up on.
Yeah.
But the difference is, of those 20 to 30% that we say are cool, how many of those do we actually ever follow up on and say, hey, I am going to go ask that person to go get lunch and talk about something interesting.
Yeah.
I am going to go, actually run out the door and start training for that marathon, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think I think there's got to be something to taking the idea from your brain and like putting it in the physical world. Of you can have ideas and not speak it. So it's like in that example, that context, you're speaking it to me.
Yeah.
But there also can be times where you need to actually write the idea down.
Yeah.
It's like, say you're driving, or it's the classic, I had this crazy idea in the shower.
In the shower.
It's like find a way to journal or to reflect or to write down your ideas instead of them being fleeting thoughts. So I feel like so much of that quote you pulled from that podcast of there's so many ideas that aren't acted on.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the reason is they're not put into the physical world, and that's written down, spoken, typed out, whatever.
Visualized, typed out. Yeah. I was going to say something that I think is a really interesting anecdote that I used, especially as a kid. And I know you did because we went to school together in college, but I just think of how often it was as a kid in school, whether you're doing flashcards or you're doing, just writing notes in general.
Yeah, just the effect of actually writing it down.
Exactly. A lot of that is memorization. So maybe you're not coming up with new creative ideas, but the muscle memory of...
It's using two different parts of your brain to remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And when we're talking about actually taking action, you just said it. The first action is like literally the most basic, hey, I should write this down.
Yeah.
Number one, just so I don't forget it. But number two, once it's out there, it's like, oh, maybe I should check that box and do that.
Well, it's real when you put it, like you said, when you take it from your head, it becomes real. Whether it's something that you actually need to act on is another story. But it's something that you're thinking and collecting of your ideas on paper or when you're journaling or in a conversation.
What role does, like you just mentioned, writing down, getting the idea outside of your head play in not only just not forgetting it, but also organizing it, testing it, throwing it against the wall with your friends saying, hey, like, what if we did it like this? What if we did it like that?
Yeah. I had this like English teacher in college that did these like workshop, like brain mapping, like to help us write our papers. And one of the exercises was literally just for like a minute, just write down everything that came into your head, on this topic.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter the spelling, you didn't need to formulate sentences. You didn't need
grammar.
Grammar, spell correctly.
Yeah.
But the idea was like everything just put down, just start typing out, or you could be writing it out in some cases.
Yeah.
Was just super helpful of like, oh my gosh, there's all these pieces here.
Yeah.
And then you can go back and formulate ideas and this should go, this should stay.
Yes.
And I think that's the same with journaling. Like we almost need to like mind dump in the morning.
No, man, that is such a great segue into I'm the same way. When I talk about school, I just think how many tools we used in school that we kind of forget about as adults. But organizationally, right, it's like maybe you have all this stuff that you have to put down into a paper that's going to be 5 pages long. Yeah. Your teacher's going to say, hey, that information's great, but we need to outline and organize that into a coherent paragraphs. This is how you're going to come to a conclusion. Yeah. And like you said, that ability to write that idea or kind of mind dump whenever, you're formulating ideas, you need to do that. But then it's like, go back. Maybe you go to sleep, you come back the next morning.
You have to revisit. You can't work with it right after it.
No.
It's almost like you need that refresher to come back to where you can get that clarity of the thoughts that you had of, oh, this makes a lot of sense. Or no, this is...
This is nonsense.
This is nonsense.
But then it's easier to start organizing it. And we have talked so much about action, I feel like in this past 2 months, of putting in plans backwards, however you want to do it, and writing, okay, there's a big goal, you got to have steps, you got to have journeys, and that all has to start, that action has to come with an idea and then writing it down, putting out a plan.
Yeah, I think we also we did many episodes on like when you have that bigger goal, or you do have that clarity, almost like work backwards, from that huge idea.
Yeah.
Of like, what would this actually take? How many hours would this take? How many, emails would I have to send? How many calls? How many, whatever. It's almost work backwards, excuse me, from that bigger goal, and create a plan from there.
Talk a little bit about the fear that might happen if, hey, I have this crazy idea in my head. I really want to chase this goal, this dream. You have a crazy goal that you're currently on, but I know that people still give you kind of a sideways look when you say you want to run 50 marathons in 50 states. Talk about the idea of
50 in each state.
Yeah. But talk about like the fear of, a lot of times I think we keep it in our mind, maybe a big idea, a big dream like that, because we're scared of taking action or maybe saying it out loud to other people that they might judge us or say, oh, you're crazy.
Yeah. I think that like original fear was like just like getting out and doing the first one of like just beginning. I think is always the hardest. Like fear like is just always beginning, at least for me. I don't know if this is a universal truth on fear, but it's like always getting started. And I think communicating that publicly or to a friend, like I said, making it real of like just buying the confirmation, like booking it, like putting on the calendar, I think is the hardest step. So as long as you can overcome that, the rest of it, becomes, okay, the steps need to be taken.
I was going to say, especially when we're talking about contextually just with your goal about running one marathon in each state, 50 states, I was thinking to myself, I think when you tell people that when you've ran 0, it's like, yeah, right. Okay. At this point you've ran 3. So it's like that first one, it's like, okay, I know how this goes. You're like, oh, this is definitely doable. And I think you're the exact same, like you just mentioned, which was such a great point, which is the hardest thing is booking it, doing it, like putting it on the calendar, buying it. And I think that
it's just beginning.
Exactly. And it's almost like, for me, it's reaffirming over and over again and using language and saying, I am going to run 50 marathons in 50 states. There's no, oh, I have this thing that I'm kind of thinking about. It's like, no, like, I mean, I've already done 3. I know I'm going to do it. And I think that language follows your act, or it almost leads your action of, I'm going to do this.
I think it's more of just like, for a big idea, for a big goal, we've been doing this podcast for a while, is like you have to break it into small digestible pieces. Like you can't expect to arrive there tomorrow. Like there is no arrival. Like there are many pieces to the puzzle, and all you can do is focus on this tiny piece of today
at a time.
This tiny piece of this week, this tiny piece of this month, in the larger goal that you have or idea that you have. So make it digestible.
Completely. Okay, let's get into, we've talked already a little bit about a lot of the hows that can kind of make this, goal of turning ideas into actions more attainable. Where should we start?
I think we got to start with like, make it real. Like, ideas, like just take them from your head and put them on paper or speak them. I think that, like you said, we talked about that at the beginning, but that is definitely the most paramount part of even remotely creating that idea and bringing it into the real world. You have to write it down. And I think then it's a reflection on those ideas of, is this something you should act on? Is this something worth your time, worth doing? Is it in alignment with some of your values or why? And I think that decision of reviewing and reflecting on your ideas is an important next step.
Completely. And I think you talked about reviewing the ideas, which is, I think, definitely true. I think when you go to do that third step, which is probably, you figure out what the thing is that you want to do, it aligns with your values. That third step is taking the first action, getting the ball rolling, right? Booking it, buying it, going on the run, etc. And I think that one thing to remember is whatever action you do, you're either you're gonna learn something you're going to have an experience, or you're going to know more. If that idea wasn't a great idea and you did it, okay, now I know.
Yeah, and you'll have to have an understanding that there's going to be fear at that action. Like it's something that just you can't live without. Like there's always going to be that in any decision, anything difficult or worth doing, it's going to be there. So if you have that understanding and you take the tiniest action of, hey, I'm going to put my shoes on and walk down the block today. Or I'm going to put my shoes on and just show up at the gym for 5 minutes, or eat one, have a few bites of salad, whatever that is, like make it small, digestible, a small action of putting it on the calendar, doing something attainable to get that first win, that first piece in that larger puzzle.
Yeah, completely. So why are we talking about this ideas versus action today?
Yeah, I think this is really just for you. I think this is, you have so many ideas now. I think it's, we've talked a lot about reflection on this podcast, and I think it's something that is a weakness of mine. I think it's something I need to journal. I need to write down my ideas. I need to act on my ideas. I do act on goals, but I'd like to just create a little more self-awareness around goals and action. So
yeah, I think for me, like you said, when and Shane lives with me, so he gets the brunt of this, but I do have a lot of different ideas, and a lot of times there's a fear that, at least in my own mind, that with a lot of these big ideas, that a lot of the ones that I let slip away, I don't want to regret not seeing those ideas out. And however you want to slice it, there's always going to be fear involved. I definitely don't want that regret later on in life. And I know that in order to not regret something, I have to act on it. And in order to act on it, I have to write it down.
Love that, man.
Yeah.
Well, let's do a quick recap. So today we talked about ideas versus action. We really put some context around what ideas are. Specifically, we can just have thoughts in our brain, and we need to create, for them to become a true idea, something that we can act on, we have to bring it to the physical world.
Yeah.
And with that, fear will be involved.
Yeah, for sure. We kind of got into the hows, and we talked about, number one, the most important thing is whenever that idea hits, whenever that lightning strikes, you have to write it down. You have to, in some physical way, bring that idea from your brain into the real world.
Yeah, speak it.
Yeah. Number two, we kind of talked about reflecting, almost letting that idea sit there for a second.
Come back to it the next day, an hour later, whatever. Where you can maybe think to act on it of, hey, this makes sense, or maybe it doesn't.
Completely. And then finally, we just talked about taking that very digestible small first step, that small first action, in order to get the ball rolling once you figured out that idea is worth pursuing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good job. And then we got into our whys. Specifically, I just want to be able to reflect and take some of these ideas that I do have and put them, into the real world. And I really liked yours of living without regret.
Yeah.
I want to take that as mine as well.
It's a hilarious idea, but it is one that it's almost that fuel by fear of no regrets, and we want to revisit these ideas and make sure that they make sense, but we definitely don't want to live with regret either. So just really taking action to see those ideas through, and that's why it's important to me this week.
Yep. I think that wraps another week of
What is Humans. Thanks.